and people definitely
Absolutely,
catch up.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think, yes, the recording has started, and so um, we can start our session. Good afternoon, colleagues, and happy
Mm.
1st of spring. Welcome to our HELIG Journal Reading Club session today. I am Dr. Lynn Kleinveld, an academic at CPUT and HELIG Chair, and my colleague, Ms. Teresa Mufana, an Information Centers Manager at IIE Vega, also the HELIG Secretary, will be facilitating the session with me this afternoon. Now, I must say that HELIG National Committee has been having this conversation for some time now, and we very much are talking about this in line with the South African Library Week's theme this year being telling powerful stories, and the upcoming Lhasa conference theme, libraries writing the next chapter. As a committee, we started brainstorming about how do we go about telling our stories and publish it. So the selection of today's article happened during one of our recent informal catching up meetings, where through a random search, Teresa and I came across this 2020 article by Emily Ford titled Tell Me Your Story, Narrative Inquiry in LIS Research, which is so fitting to unpack today and provide insight into how librarians can share experiences, reflections, and best practices in a publication. So the article introduces narrative inquiry as a qualitative research methodology that examines individual human experiences through stories. It highlights the limited use of narrative inquiry in library and information science research and provides a literature review of the few studies that have utilized it. The paper also discusses McCormack's storing stories approach, which is a multifaceted method for analyzing narrative inquiry research data. Additionally, the article outlines potential applications of narrative inquiry in LIS research. Now, in our advert, we provided a list of questions to consider while reflecting on what the article revealed. I will now hand over to my colleague, Teresa, to facilitate the discussion around some of these questions. Teresa, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. I need to be honest that, during that informal catch-up that we had, I was very hesitant to go with this article because I thought, everybody wants to hear about ChatGPT, about AI and all that. But after you had convinced me that, no, let's go ahead with this, it's very relevant even to our Liasa conference theme, as well as what we are planning to do. And I want to thank you for that, Chair, because
It's a
then
pleasure.
after that, I started reading the article. And to be honest, even in the beginning, I really found it a bit dry. I was like, I wasn't sure where it was going until, I've reached somewhere in the middle, not even in the middle. After the first page, I thought, Emily's style of writing, it was very, I don't know what to call it, but it wasn't really resonating with me. But when I reached, the second page and up to the end, I really engaged with the article And what I really like the most is the fact that it's promoting that human centric, that is also included in our own profession, which is human focused. We are a support service, that is always looking after our patrons' needs. So I really found this article relevant, not only for this particular session that we have, but overall in our librarianship space. So thank you so much
It's
for
a
this,
pleasure.
Chair.
I think what I ultimately got out of the article was how we um, we forget that we experience such a lot every day in what we do, and we don't share that enough. And here we get ideas of how we can put our experiences into writing, onto paper, and get it published. As much as the author uh, uh, admits, it's quite a long process. And if one looks at how and what was described, there's this combination of reflecting um, on participants' stories, more in line with having a conversation with colleagues like we are having today, and through the responses and the sharing of experiences, using that together with one's interpretation of that and reflecting on it. So it's certainly an approach to explore in more detail, especially since there are only few studies that have used this methodology. So perhaps we can also hear from our participants in the room. What are your thoughts on the article? What stood out for you? You may raise your hand or type your your um, your comments in the chat space.
Thank you. And I have just quickly put our questions in the chat for
I see.
ease of
I see.
referring to.
Thank you, Teresa, for doing that, because I was just thinking now, how am I going to juggle this with sharing the cover slide and also
And
needing to
yeah,
get to the questions? So thank you for that. It certainly helps us to have the questions in the chat, colleagues. So these are the questions that we also included in the advert. So as you were reading the article, and the purpose of the journal reading club that we host is that we read the article that was selected. We have a look at the questions, and that assists us and facilitates the discussion around in your reflection on reading the article, what stood out, um, what you think about the overall style of the article. And talking about style and writing style, I have to admit and agree with you, Teresa. Some parts of the article, and I found it quite informal. Um, in the writing style that was used, and perhaps that is what has been um, the hindering factor in not telling our stories, because we're always thinking about how we need to be writing in academic style,
academic
and
style. Yeah.
we always I'm just thinking about um, the workshop or the webinar um, that was recently hosted on publishing in Sageless and all the key elements that one needs to consideration, academic writing being one of those key elements. And here we see the article written not very much in an academic writing style. Parts of it very much informal. This is what I picked up from it, and perhaps that is our starting point, is to be encouraged to write. Start by describing our experiences in an informal manner, and then develop it into a publication. And here we see how this played out in the writing style of this particular article.
I completely agree with you, Chair. And to be honest, like I'm saying that in the beginning, it took me a while to engage with the article, but that informal type of, writing slowly got me in. And I think it also encouraged me to read further. And I also liked how the author brought in that humanity or human factor into the article by delving into the actual interviewees' responses and put them there. It really drove me there. I wasn't there, but that's the feeling that I got. And I think that also got me excited about the actual narrative inquiry research that,
Yes.
you are able to do your own storytelling and driving your reader to where they have
Yes.
never been before. So yeah, I think I'm sold after reading this, and
Yes.
I'm intending to read even further, those that she cites,
Absolutely. I just thought that after reading this article, it's worth now actually going to those publications, because that would give us even more insight into how then to approach our own stories, and getting it then to that point that it can be published. But another point that stood out for me, and I think this was really interesting, was the description of narrative inquiry as a type of qualitative research, and that it is very much focused on human stories, and that there are two types of narrative inquiry, the one being a paradigmatic, and the other one narrative analytic type. And I'm going to just read a part of this where the author explains what the paradigmatic analysis is. It seeks to locate common themes or conceptual manifestations among the stories collected as data. And to an extent, I agree with the author, further explaining that this is commonly used, and I'm sure all of us have some experience in this when analyzing qualitative data, because it's all about identifying the themes in the responses, and so I could relate to the paradigmatic analysis type. And then she further explains that in contrast, the narrative analytic type requires the researcher to develop or discover a plot that displays the linkage among the data elements as part of an unfolding temporal development culminating in the denouement. So this was quite thought provoking, and she also cites Polkinghorne that describes paradigmatic types or an analysis of narrative and a narrative analytic type or narrative analysis. So that also stood out for me in this article, that we have these two types of narrative inquiry, and perhaps we didn't even realize that we do this to some extent in our content analysis processes that we perform in analyzing qualitative data. And then bringing in this stories approach by the Australian researcher McCormack. That was also quite interesting. And it's a human-focused method in a human-focused methodology, and can provide humanistic results. And this is rooted in the value of understanding individual lived experiences, and uses them rather as a mirror to reflect and reevaluate our own views and practices. And recently I attended one of these research workshops, and the professor explained how important it is to focus on lived experiences. And here the stories approach focuses on that, and how we need to be thinking about our own views and practices. So that stood out for me in the article. It got me thinking about how I need to be thinking about my writing, and using lived experiences in the writing. So I'm not sure if there are any comments in the chat yet, or anybody wants to unmute and share their views on this. Do you think, colleagues, at this stage you are comfortable to attempt narrative inquiry research?
And I see we have our group has grown slightly bigger. We now have 12 participants.
That's wonderful. Welcome, everybody. But we'd like to hear from you. After reading this article, what are your thoughts? This is what the Reading Club is all about, that we are having a conversation, unpacking the article, what stood out for you, what didn't you like maybe about the article, and what the author had to say.
And while we are waiting for our colleagues to join in, to also give their views, Doc, it was also interesting for me to read about stories, and also the fact that the author is highlighting on how the researcher can have that reflective approach on their own research. and invite the interviewees and have that collaboration, which I really thought it is wonderful that, you know, instead of you as a researcher being buried in the actual research project, you're actually reflecting and getting in touch with your interviewees, you know. And I'm thinking
Absolutely.
also not only being it as a top approach interaction, but having that collaboration where you are also learning something, listening, hearing what your interviewees are saying, you know, and dispelling your own prejudices that you may bring into the research process.
Mm, mm.
Mm,
Thank you, Teresa.
thank you.
Um, I was quite taken aback by this discovery that inquiry research in LIS is not fully established, and how it is quite a time-consuming process, and they also shared later on in the article her own experience of how long it took to get the first article published, and she was busy with another one, and it seemed as if the editorial board was delaying this process. And this was something that I also then thought about. Has it got to do with the journal? Are we perhaps targeting the wrong journals for this kind of research? Or what is it that makes such research take that long to get published? That was just a question, and it remains a big question in my mind. If such a lot of effort is going into telling your story and wanting to put it out there, versus it taking a long time to get it published, is another challenge that that librarians are facing when they have so many stories to tell. And yet it is recognized as being valuable to engage in narrative inquiry. Colleagues, what are your thoughts? Have you tried publishing an article using narrative inquiry before?
Oh, there's a
Hello,
hand. Yes,
hello,
Fatima.
Fatima. Welcome. Please go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon, colleagues.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I was fascinated by the topic, and I must admit that I didn't get all the way through the article. But it's if we as practicing librarians can do reflective narrative papers, we will really enrich the literature and inform, teaching and learning of LIS as well. But your question, and Ellen, about have you tried to do it? I have. It's actually very difficult. So I ended up with case studies rather than you know, really reflective, I think, in the way that was meant. And it's also difficult from the point of view that one needs to have a lot of self-awareness. One needs to know what your filters are. So in critical librarianship and critical cataloging that we've been talking about the cataloging code of ethics. There again, there's an acknowledgement that one does not come from a vacuum. You have filters, you come from a particular experience as a person in the world, whether it's a woman, a man, or if you identify differently and so on. So it's not an easy thing to do. it might look like it's easy, but I think it is difficult. But I think it's also like you develop a muscle for it. And the more that you do it, the easier it becomes. But I think you have to develop it.
Mm.
That's my submission. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Fatima, for your valuable input. Absolutely, I agree. One needs to get started. I think it's just making that start, and then building on that, developing that with, I guess, some guidelines, some guidance, advice, you know. And my next step after this session is actually now to delve deeper into those few studies that used this a methodology, and look at how they went about conducting the study from a reflective point of view, and the writing up of that. So that's my next step, so that I can sort of get into this way of thinking, of using a different approach. Because yes, I agree, Fatima, my research has always been very much case study based, but there's such a lot to reflect on, and I do think it will add value to the LIS profession and the field if we you know, try to explore this a bit more as a different approach to telling our stories. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatima. Do we have anybody else who wants to share?
I see Matlala posted in the chat. I am motivated to try narrative inquiry in my future research. The article made me think deeper about the type of LIS profession we are and the valuable research that can be conducted in this field. But like already said, it was more informal rather than following strict plan and procedure on academic writing. Thank you, Lala, and I do take note that you needed to leave for another meeting, but thank you so much for your input. Yes, absolutely. And I think that also speaks to the challenge that that I raised earlier about the journal selection for this type of research, and looking at the requirements and the academic writing style compared to this being very much leaning to informal writing, because it is reflecting on those stories. And if we think about stories in general, when somebody tells you a story, it is not in an academic style. The way we have a conversation with one another and sharing stories, it's very much informal. And so I guess there's that challenge that we are then facing between the informal and the formal academic writing style. And that seems perhaps to be where that clash is happening and contributing to there being only a few studies that have used this method and got published. But I also believe that it is also good to take on a new challenge and keep on trying and working through this. So yes. And especially the storing part of the article, if one looks at storing stories and how it is presented here with the quotations in between, it's very much informal. The way the author wrote, but you've withdrawn articles, ... very informal conversation like. And the responses also from participants. This theme of valuing community and the fear of loneliness seems to permeate Julie's perspective as well as emotions to her work, both in research and writing, but as well as a service. As I ask more about withdrawing articles from publications, this becomes even clearer. So yes, it was quite informal.
Yeah, and Chair, if you allow me, I also want
Yes.
to concur with Matlala that, you know, this article has really empowered or encouraged one to look up. To be honest, narrative inquiry research hasn't really been, you know, that I could consider before. But after engaging with this article and a good style by the author to outline the objectives of, you know, how we can use it in the LIS field, I really found it useful and engaging. And some of the objectives that were highlighted, especially under the storying stories, as that of helping us broaden LIS literature, as you have alluded to the fact that there seems to be a gap in the LIS field, that we are more inclined to the quantitative research as opposed to the qualitative research. And also that the narrative inquiry holds that utility for us to better understand the lived experiences of our patrons in their authentic context, so that we can respond better to their needs. What more can a librarian, you know, believe in than this? And the third one that they outline is that it allows us to better understand individual experiences within our own LIS community and enable us to reflect and reimagine those experiences not yet had. So I think this is exactly what we are trying to do here by reflecting on our own term as HELIG National Committee during our term. this is with anticipation to share knowledge and experiences with colleagues who will definitely take over from us. Yeah, that's what I thought about it, that, you know, it's more real than what I believed it to be in the beginning before reading the article. Yeah.
Absolutely, Teresa. I think that this definitely encourages us not to be scared to start out with our rough draft, and just each one sharing their experience in serving on the committee during a term, because perhaps that is what we need, that LIASA members learn about the experience through our stories, and that way we'll feel more encouraged to want to participate more actively in LIASA activities. Perhaps there's that fear because everything is so formal, publication and the thought of publishing, it's still a daunting experience for many, and that by providing and sharing with colleagues a different approach will certainly help and encourage, we hope, that more and more members would want to then get actively involved, because we are sharing our stories, and say it as it is. Perhaps that is what is needed. And so definitely, I hope that this is going to help us to say it as it is, and that it will also provide insight for incoming members on how to serve on these committees in the in LIASA, and leading the profession that way through active participation and engagement in the interest groups, etc. So yes, definitely inspiring, I would say. I think it takes that bit of tension away from just putting one out there to begin the story, and then taking it from there. I'm not sure if there are any other thoughts or comments on the article.
There's nothing in the chat. Yeah, there's nothing in the chat. Does any one of you colleagues want to say something as we wrap up? We are almost at the end of our session for today. And we really appreciate you having taken time to be with us today, but definitely we'll also want to hear from you. And also while we wait, there's something that also caught my attention that I got from this article, from Andrew Sparks' article called Embodiment Academics and the Audits Culture. So there's a quote here that says, when we hear others' stories, we think about our own and how we can change our own narratives. So
Absolutely.
yeah, that also touched
And
my
I
heart.
think that speaks very much to the way we have conversations every day. You listen to one story, and you can't wait to then tell your story, and without realizing it, this is how we engage every day informally, whether it's with friends or colleagues, and so we share stories with one another, and certainly this is the way to go with our profession as well. Tell the stories, and so too colleagues will feel encouraged to tell their stories as well. So if there's no further thoughts or comments or any questions, I think we have run out of time, because the session is until, yes, 1:45. It is now 1:48. But then I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank Teresa for facilitating the session with me, and also to the participants for your valuable input to the discussions on telling our stories through narrative inquiry in LIS research, unpacking this article. And I hope that it provided you with some more insight on taking on the challenge of telling your story and publishing it. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon, and for engaging with us, and also to our colleague that supports us behind the scenes with the technical issues, Afafele. Thank you so much for your time and your technical support this afternoon in hosting the HELIG Reading Journal Club session. I would like to wish you all well. Enjoy your first day of spring, and see us next time when we'll engage on other topics. And we want to wish you well with taking up the challenge and writing your stories. Thank you, and have a lovely day further.
Thank you.